Rain. It was always rain on the nights that changed your life. It wasn't a gentle drizzle, but a relentless, horizontal downpour that attacked the windows of the Midnight Diner, making the neon sign outside bleed into the darkness. My name is Maya, and for the last 3 years, this diner had been my whole world. The cracked vinyl booths, the smell of stale coffee and grease, the graveyard shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., it was a purgatory of fluorescent lights and quiet desperation. I was 24, and my life was a monument to dead ends. An art degree that had gotten me nowhere, student loans that were a constant, gnawing anxiety, and a future that looked as bleak and empty as the diner was at 3 a.m. That's when he walked in. The bell above the door chimed, a soft, lonely sound. He was an older man, maybe in his late 60s, dressed in a simple, well-worn coat beaded with rain. He moved slowly, with a careful, deliberate grace, as if every movement required thought. He didn't look like much. Just another lonely soul seeking refuge from the storm. He took a seat in my section, in a corner booth. I put on my best waitress smile, the one that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Welcome to the Midnight Diner. What can I get for you?" He looked up, and his eyes stopped me. They were the color of a winter sky, and they held a depth of sadness that was almost physical. But there was a kindness there, too. A profound, weary gentleness. "Just coffee, please?" "Black," he said, his voice a soft, gravelly whisper. "You got it." I brought him his coffee. He didn't pull out a phone or a newspaper. He just sat, staring into the steam rising from his mug, his hands, gnarled and dotted with age spots, wrapped around it for warmth. An hour passed. The rain continued its assault. I wiped down counters, refilled sugar shakers, anything to look busy. Every time I glanced his way, he was in the same position, a statue of quiet contemplation. He'd sip his coffee, then return to staring. Something about his solitude called to me. It wasn't the demanding loneliness of other late-night customers, it was a peaceful, final kind of alone. I walked over with the coffee pot. "Warm you up?" He looked up, a faint smile touching his lips. "Thank you, dear." As I poured, I noticed the book peeking out of his coat pocket. It was a collection of poetry. "Rilke. You're a reader," I said, nodding toward it. His smile widened slightly. "A lifelong affliction. Do you read poetry?" "I used to," I said, the admission surprising me. Before this." I gestured vaguely at the diner. "There is no before this," he said gently. "There is only life. And sometimes, life serves you coffee in a diner at 3 a.m. It doesn't make the poetry any less true." We started talking. His name was Arthur. And for the next 2 hours, in that empty, rain-lashed diner, we talked about everything. Not the weather, not the news. We talked about art. He asked me what I painted. I told him I hadn't picked up a brush in 2 years. He asked why, and for the first time, I told someone the truth. Because it doesn't pay the bills. Because it feels selfish. Like a childish dream. He listened, his winter sky eyes never leaving my face. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell me to follow my heart. He just understood. "The world tries very hard to make us forget who we are," he said softly. "It trades our dreams for security, our passion for practicality. But the soul has a memory. It never truly forgets." When the first hint of dawn began to tinge the sky a bruised purple, Arthur sighed. It was a sound of finality. "I should be going," he said. He asked for the check. It came to $4.75 for the coffee. I handed it to him, a strange sense of loss already settling in my chest. This strange, beautiful conversation was over. He pulled out his wallet, a simple, old leather bifold. He placed a crisp $100 bill on the table. "Keep the change," he said. I stared at it. $100 tip on a $5 tab? It was insane. "Sir, I can't accept this. It's too much." He stood up and put on his coat. "Consider it an investment." "An investment in what?" "In a painter who's forgotten she's a painter," he said, his eyes locking with mine. "Buy new brushes. Buy good canvas. And remember." He turned and walked out into the thinning rain, disappearing into the pre-dawn gloom. I stood there, holding the $100 bill, feeling like I'd just dreamed the whole thing. I looked down at the table. He'd left another bill underneath his coffee mug. I picked it up. It wasn't 100, it was 1,022 of them. I counted them twice, my hands trembling so violently I could barely hold the paper. $22,000. In cash. Left on a Formica table by a man who liked Rilke. My knees gave way. I slid into the booth he'd just vacated, the money fanned out on the table in front of me. It was more money than I'd seen in my entire life. It was freedom. It was a miracle. The $22,000 tip changed my life in an instant. It was the key to my cage. But I didn't know then, as I sat there weeping with joy and confusion, that his death that night would change my heart forever. I called in sick for the next 3 shifts. I couldn't face the diner. I couldn't pour coffee and make small talk when my world had been tilted on its axis. The money sat in a shoebox under my bed, a tangible, bewildering secret. For the first day, I just existed in a state of shock. I'd take the money out, count it, and put it back, half convinced it would turn to leaves or vanish into smoke. It didn't. It was real. On the second day, the guilt set in. Who was he? Why did he give it to me? Had I taken advantage of a lonely, confused old man? The thought was a cold stone in my stomach. I had to find him. I had to thank him properly, or maybe, give it back. I had nothing to go on. A first name. Arthur. A worn copy of Rilke. A profound sadness in his eyes. I started with the obvious. I scoured the local news for any reports of a missing person or, something worse. Nothing. I called the few hospitals in the area, my heart in my throat, asking if an Arthur had been admitted. No one matching his description. It was on the third day, while scrolling through the obituaries online, a morbid, last-ditch effort, that I found him. His picture stared back at me from the screen. It was him. A little younger, a little less weary, but those same kind, winter sky eyes. Arthur P. Henderson. 68, passed away peacefully at home. Peacefully at home. The date of death was the same night he'd been in the diner. He had come to me hours, maybe minutes, before he died. The air left my lungs. I read the obituary again and again, the words blurring. It listed a cause of death, a long illness. It mentioned he was a retired professor of literature. A philanthropist. It listed a surviving sister. A legacy. But it didn't mention the $22,000. It didn't mention the diner. It didn't mention me. I felt a grief so sharp and specific it shocked me. I had known this man for 2 hours, and his death felt like an amputation. The last act of his life had been an act of staggering generosity towards a stranger. He had chosen to spend his final hours talking about art and poetry with a waitress in a dead-end diner. The $22,000 was no longer just money. It was a final testament. A message in a bottle. Remember. I couldn't give it back. The thought now felt like an insult. But keeping it for myself felt equally wrong. This wasn't a lottery win. This was a sacred trust. The obituary listed the time and place of his memorial service. It was tomorrow. I had to go. I wore the only nice dress I owned, a simple black shift. The service was held in a small, non-denominational chapel. It was filled with people, former students, colleagues, family. They spoke of his brilliance, his kindness, his quiet philanthropy. They talked about the millions he'd donated to libraries and literacy programs. I sat in the back row, a ghost. I didn't belong here. I was a footnote in the final chapter of a great man's life. After the service, people gathered in a reception hall. I lingered on the outskirts, clutching my purse, feeling like an imposter. I saw an older woman who shared Arthur's eyes, standing alone for a moment, accepting condolences. It had to be his sister. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had to talk to her. I walked over, my legs feeling like wood. "Excuse me? Miss Henderson?" She turned, her eyes, red-rimmed but composed, looked me over. "Yes? My name is Maya. I was a friend of Arthur's." The word felt both true and inadequate. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. She didn't recognize me. Of course she didn't. "I'm sorry, dear, how did you know my brother? Was he one of your professors?" "No," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "He came into the diner where I work. The midnight diner. The night he passed." Her face changed. The polite, grieving mask softened into something else, recognition, and a deep, aching wonder. "You're the waitress," she breathed. She reached out and took my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "He talked about you." I stared at her, stunned. He did. "He called me when he got home that night," she said, her eyes welling with fresh tears. His voice was so light. "He said he'd had the most wonderful conversation. That he'd met a young artist who had lost her way. He said talking to you was like hearing an unfinished symphony. It gave him so much peace." I started to cry then, silent tears streaming down my face. He hadn't just given me money. He had given me a place in his story. "The money," I stammered. "The 22,000. I can't keep it. It's too much." She shook her head, squeezing my hand. "No, child. That money was his to give. He was a very wealthy man, but he never carried more than a few dollars on him. That night, he went to the bank on his way to the diner. He knew it was his last night. He told me he was looking for the right person. The right symphony." She smiled through her tears. "He found you. You must keep it." It was his final wish. I left the memorial service a different person. The weight of the money was no longer a burden of guilt, but a profound responsibility. Arthur hadn't just invested in my art. He had entrusted me with his final act of faith in the world. I went home, took the shoebox from under my bed, and placed it on my kitchen table. I looked at the stacks of bills. It was time to finish the symphony. The first thing I bought was not a brush or a canvas. It was courage. I quit my job at the midnight diner. The manager called me irresponsible, my coworkers thought I was crazy. But I felt a clarity I had never known. Arthur's gift had bought me the one thing I needed most, time. Then, I went to an art supply store. I walked the aisles like a pilgrim in a sacred temple. I didn't buy the cheapest supplies anymore. I bought professional-grade oils, a set of sable brushes so fine they felt like whispers against my skin, and a stack of primed linen canvases. The act of purchasing them was a ritual, a recommitment. I turned my small living room into a studio. The morning light was perfect. I set up my easel, squeezed blobs of color onto a fresh wooden palette, cadmium red, ultramarine blue, titanium white, and I just stood there, a blank canvas staring back at me. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of it. I didn't paint a still life or a landscape. I started painting the memory of that night. I painted the rain-streaked window of the diner. I painted the steam rising from a mug of coffee. And I painted Arthur's hands, those wise, gnarled hands wrapped around the warmth. I poured all the feeling of that conversation, the loneliness, the connection, the profound, quiet transfer of hope, into the canvas. It was the best work I had ever done. It was alive. Weeks turned into months. I painted with a ferocious dedication I didn't know I possessed. The $22,000 wasn't just sitting in a bank account, it was fuel. It paid my rent, my bills, my groceries, freeing my mind to focus entirely on creation. I started a series. I called it The Midnight Conversations. Each painting was a tribute to the unseen people, the quiet moments, the hidden beauty in the mundane. A bus driver's hands on the wheel at dawn. An old woman feeding pigeons in the park. The way light hit a puddle on a cracked pavement. I was painting the world Arthur had taught me to see, a world brimming with poetry. I started an Instagram account, just to document the work. I didn't expect much. But people responded. They felt the story in the brushstrokes. A local coffee shop asked to display a few pieces. Then a small gallery. A review in the city paper called my work hauntingly empathetic and mentioned the mysterious patron who had made it possible. The story of the $22,000 tip began to spread. It was picked up by a local news station. They wanted to interview me. I was terrified, but I heard Arthur's voice in my head, remember. I did the interview. I told them about Arthur. I didn't portray him as a saint, but as a man who, facing the end, chose to make one last, beautiful connection. I talked about the weight of his gift, and the responsibility I felt to honor it. The story went viral. Donations started trickling in, not to me, but to a literacy charity in Arthur's name. But more importantly, messages poured in from people my age. Your story made me pick up my guitar again. I enrolled in that writing class I was always too scared to take. I finally quit my toxic job. Arthur's single act of kindness was creating a ripple effect, inspiring others to reclaim their own forgotten dreams. The gallery showing for The Midnight Conversations was a sellout. I stood in the corner, watching people study my paintings, their faces thoughtful, moved. I wasn't the waitress anymore. I was the artist. A woman approached me. She had kind eyes and a warm smile. Maya? I'm Evelyn, the director of the Community Arts Center. We've been following your story. We'd like to offer you a position. Not as a teacher, but as our artist in residence. Your job would be to create, and to mentor other young artists who feel lost. It was the dream job I never knew existed. A salary. A studio. A purpose. As I accepted, shaking her hand, I felt the final piece of Arthur's gift click into place. He hadn't just given me money to paint. He had given me a path. A life. That night, I went back to the midnight diner. I sat in Arthur's booth. The same night shift cook was there. He nodded at me, a look of respect in his eyes. I ordered a coffee. Black. As I sat there, the familiar smells and sounds wrapping around me, I didn't feel trapped anymore. I felt connected. To Arthur. To the quiet symphony of the night. To the person I had been, and the person I had become. The $22,000 had changed my life on the outside. It had paid my debts, bought me time, launched my career. But Arthur's death, his final, selfless act, that had changed my heart. It had taught me about the power of a single moment of connection. It had shown me that our legacy isn't in the money we leave behind, but in the lives we touch, the hope we ignite, the symphonies we help others to finish. I finished my coffee and left a $100 tip on the table for the next waitress. It wasn't out of guilt or a need to imitate Arthur. It was a passing of the torch. A silent promise to keep the chain of kindness going. The revenge was silent, but it was against the despair that had once held me captive. And the victory was a life lived in color, a testament to a man who saw a fading painting and chose, with his last breath, to restore it. 5 years later, the Henderson Grant is one of the most unique and sought-after awards in the local arts scene. funded by the initial $22,000, which I used as its seed capital, and now supported by donations from those touched by the story. It doesn't give a cash prize. It gives time. It provides a year's worth of rent and living expenses to one struggling artist, a waiter, a barista, a retail worker, someone who has put their passion on hold just to survive. I am the head of the selection committee. We don't look for the most technically perfect portfolio. We look for the spark. The unfinished symphony. The one who reminds us of who we all once were. My own career has flourished. The Midnight Conversations series hangs in a permanent exhibit at the City Art Museum, right next to a plaque telling Arthur's story. I have a studio in a bright, airy loft, and my paintings sell for more than I ever made in a year at the diner, but the success feels secondary. The real work, the important work, happens at the Community Arts Center and in the quiet deliberations of the Grant Committee. One rainy afternoon, much like the one when I first met Arthur, I was working in my studio. The city sprawled below my window, a tapestry of lives and stories. My assistant buzzed in. "Maya, there's a young man here to see you. A Ben Carter. He says he doesn't have an appointment, but he'd like to give you something." I was used to this now. People sometimes came by to share their stories, to show me what they'd created after being inspired by Arthur. I told her to send him up. He was maybe 22, dressed in jeans and a worn jacket, holding a large, flat package wrapped in brown paper. He looked nervous, his eyes wide as he took in the studio. "Miss Thorne? I'm Ben. I was the cook. At the Midnight Diner. The night you met Mr. Henderson." The past rushed back in a wave. I remembered him, a quiet, lanky kid always buried in a sketchbook during his breaks. "Ben," I said, smiling. "Of course I remember you. How are you?" "I'm good. Really good," he said, his nerves beginning to fade into a bright, proud energy. "I heard you talking to that old man that night. I saw the look on your face when you found the money. And when you quit, it lit a fire under me. I saved up, I went to design school." He held out the package. I wanted to give you this. To say thank you." I took the package and carefully unwrapped it. It was a graphic novel. The art was stunning, dynamic, expressive, full of shadow and light. The title was The Last Tip. I opened it. It was our story. Rendered in beautiful, poignant panels. There was the diner in the rain. There was Arthur, perfectly captured with his kind, sad eyes. There was me, the tired waitress, the shock of finding the money, the journey of rediscovery. He had even drawn the moment I'd left the $100 tip years later, passing the kindness on. Tears filled my eyes. "It was a masterpiece, Ben, this is incredible," I whispered. "I got a publisher," he said, beaming. "It comes out next month. And I got a job at a major studio. I'm a storyboard artist now. Because of you. Because of him." I looked from his hopeful, proud face to the graphic novel in my hands. Arthur's single act had saved me. My story, in turn, had saved Ben. And his art would now go out into the world and inspire countless others. The ripple was now a wave. That evening, I went to visit Arthur. I go to his graveside often, to talk, to update him. It's always clean and well kept, but today, there was a single, fresh white lily resting against the headstone. I hadn't put it there. I knelt down. "You see, Arthur?" I said softly to the granite stone. "It's still going. Your symphony. It's everywhere now." I told him about Ben. I told him about the latest Henderson Grant recipient, a young poet who worked as a night security guard. I told him about my latest painting. It was a quiet conversation, like the one we'd had in the diner, full of understanding. The $22,000 tip had been the seed. But the true legacy was immeasurable. It was in the lives changed, the dreams rekindled, the chain of kindness that continued to grow, link by beautiful link. I stood to leave, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the distance. The revenge was complete, but it wasn't against a person. It was a revenge against cynicism. Against giving up. Against the quiet despair of a mundane life. Arthur Henderson's final act had been a silent strike against the darkness, and the light it created was still spreading, illuminating one dream at a time. The most powerful revenge on a cruel world is not to become hard, but to remain soft. To take the pain, the struggle, the disappointment, and use it to fuel an act of such profound kindness that its echo changes lives long after you're gone. A single moment of grace can shatter a lifetime of despair. This has been Silent Revenge.